we talk about family engagement, because parenting a young person, as you all know, can look like a lot of different things. So we talk about authentic family engagement and the role that families must play in policy and practice and ensuring equitable policy and practice in their schools. And why that is important is because it takes the entire community to fully understand what is going on with students, what is going on with young people, and make sure that schools are being responsive to it. And I think the strongest, and I think this is supported by both research and common sense, the strongest situations that we have in schools that truly support young people involve families in authentic ways. I actually love the way you started, because we often say it's not about selling cookies or asking parents to occasionally show up at a meeting, but building those strategic relationships that are based on real involvement in what is happening in the school, to make sure schools are responsive to community and student needs, and to make sure that families feel like they understand what's going on in schools and are part of influencing what that looks like.
The biggest way I think families can feel included is for the system to really work for them. I think one of the challenges that we have as parents is that, we send our kids to school and we go to work. And then in order for us to engage in the school, we would have to either take off work, or we would have to have flexible work hours, or we would have to do something that is, significantly different than our daily life. And I think the challenge, I think, with the current system is the people that are able to do that are then able to have an outsized voice in the outcomes. And so it becomes not equitable very quickly. And so the challenge, I think, as parents, and really as how we think about having equitable outcomes for parents, is really how to figure out how to get parents engaged in a way that enables them to not put an undue burden on teachers and administrators, but at the same time also provides a space or a time where you can get a more fuller engagement from the broader community.
So in 2020, we really saw states starting to adopt these so-called anti-CRT laws, anti-critical race theory laws, which were really aimed at restricting conversations, truthful conversations about history, the history of race, and other forms of discrimination in this country, sort of clipping the through lines of that history to what we are seeing currently, what students are experiencing currently in their everyday lives in terms of systemic inequities. And they really attacked a lot of other really critical pieces of young people's education, like their ability to engage in extracurricular activities, the ability of teachers to be able to receive training on important topics related to equity and discrimination and how their students are experiencing it. And so we saw those laws really start, and I live in Texas, and so ours, actually several, passed in early 2020. And then we saw those laws being used to defend other practices that were not actually part of the law at all. And so we saw in communities across the state and across the country, censorship of books in school libraries, lists being developed of books that people felt children shouldn't be exposed to in their libraries and classrooms.
The bottom line of all of this, right, is that it's really forcing you as a parent to now educate your child in all of these things that the school should have been doing and was doing. And frankly, the teachers are clearly more equipped to discuss equity, CRT, and all these other things than a typical parent is. And I think when we talk about parents' rights, I think where the push and pull is the more rights and flexibility you give to your parents, the more stress it puts on teachers. And where I would want the teacher to be spending all of their time preparing lesson plans, I have, my kindergarten teachers telling me that they have to make sure their lessons don't include language like identity, even though it's really important to help a kindergartner understand what it is to have an identity, right? And so for me, the Parents' Rights Campaign puts an additional burden on parents who were confident that their kids were getting a full education to now either A, advocate alongside parents who want to ban books and ban language and do these things. And so either advocate in opposition of them or instruct your own child. And I think both of those are a very tough task for parents who already found it very hard to be engaged.
Yeah.
And so to me, I think that that's the challenge that we have to face now with the new sort of parents' rights campaign. It's part of why I'm running for school board and why we're trying to get more people to run for school board, because there has to be an end to this. Otherwise, the education will look very different, 5-10 years from now.
What is the breakthrough messaging for combating these false narratives about parents' rights? Morgan, I'm going to have you start us off.
I think there are a couple of important elements for the messaging. One, talking about all families and who they are, and who often does not feel connected to a school community. So families of color, immigrant families, and really painting the picture of like all of these families should be part of the conversation. So we're not focused on certain families, the loudest families, the families with the most access, but who are all these families and what do they look like, and what do they want, and what are those shared common things that everyone wants for young people. I think that's an important part of the messaging. And then I think the second thing I'll add is just that even though there are difficulties for some parents to be able to engage with the school, it is a school's responsibility to build community in an authentic way. We shouldn't put all of the responsibility on each individual parent to figure out how to work around a job schedule or figure out how to get themselves to the school building for a pre-scheduled meeting. It's the school's responsibility to figure out what is going on in a particular community, the needs of that particular community, and how they build systems of outreach and authentic engagement to reach every single family in that community.
One of the challenges of trying to recenter the conversation is that parents don't have the understanding of CRT to begin with. And so you have parents on the one side that are saying things that are obviously not CRT. We've had discussions with parents who don't want our kindergartners to be learning about equity or identity or diversity. And a lot of these things are just sort of basic things that you need to understand to be a human being, to identify with your neighbor. And so it becomes very hard to then engage with them on a level that says, hey, listen, I am focused on my kindergartner and your kindergartner learning to read. It does not matter what we are learning to read here, because there is no kindergarten book that is going to indoctrinate your child that is in public school today.
And if I could just share for a second about the model that IDRA has developed over the past couple of decades that was really built with families in the lower Rio Grande Valley in Texas, a lot of immigrant families, a lot of Spanish-speaking families who just felt like they did not have a place in the traditional PTA model in their school. And so what we found from working with them was that it was really building community with them and supporting local community building efforts however we could that were outside of the school context to start with. So making sure that there were relationships, it turned out to mostly be women, among the women in the organizations, that they had an understanding of like the school system and the way it worked and where the levers of power were, but that they identified the issues that were important for their own children, and that they identified an education-focused project for their own children. And sometimes that did not look like showing up at the school. Often it didn't. It was within community and what could they do to support students in their community. That being said, I think it's really important for people to understand how to engage in schools. And like I said earlier, for schools to make every effort to reach out in every way to all parents in the community to make sure they understand the many ways that they can engage in sort of the policy and practice of the school. So I think it is both. I think it is building community around children, supporting them when that's outside of the school context, but also making sure that there are opportunities for people to engage in a really authentic way within the structure of the school where their kids spend so much of the day. Showing up
makes a material difference in the outcome of what we can achieve. And I'll just give you a personal narrative example. So I had an issue with CRT and a school board member, and I committed to just showing up. I committed to just going to every school board meeting from that moment on, and I started going to school board meetings. And sure enough, after the third school board meeting, me being the only one there, I met almost all the school board trustees. And then after that, they asked me if I wanted to be on the special education committee to figure out, because my oldest daughter has special needs, they asked me to help them sort of improve our special ed program. And then because I kept showing up, they asked me, we have this bond commission that we're gonna do almost probably $1 billion bond in Plano that will basically fund our entire school system for the next 4 years. They asked me if I wanted to be on that commission. And when I always said yes. And when I get to that particular commission, it's a room of 75 individuals in the community. None of them look like us. It's mostly white men, all from a position of significant privilege. And they are the ones that are now making decisions very specifically on what schools stay open, what schools get more resources, how we design the schools, how we put money into different programs. And you don't have a voice if you're just at home.